The Rivera family street had always been the picture of suburban tranquility. Nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, the row of houses seemed frozen in perpetual calm, freshly mowed lawns, tidy flower beds, and children's bicycles resting against porches. Tomas Rivera, a retired armored vehicle mechanic and single father, had lived there for nearly a decade with his two children, Miguel, 14, and Lucia, 12. For Tomas, the street was more than just a place to live, it was a sanctuary, a controlled environment where order and discipline reigned, shaped by years in the army and a meticulous sense of structure. Even the smallest imperfections, a crooked mailbox, a weed in the garden, felt like personal affronts, and he had spent countless evenings trimming, painting, and realigning every corner of his property to maintain a sense of calm that he hoped would carry into his family's life. At the back of the Rivera property, partly obscured by a line of dense evergreens, sat a hulking, decommissioned M1 Abrams tank. It had been Tomas' pride and a reminder of his past, a relic of his army days that he had painstakingly restored over the years. While the tank was no longer functional in a military sense, it served as a symbol of discipline, strength, and an almost protective presence in the yard. Miguel had grown up watching his father polish the metal, learn the mechanics, and explain the significance of every lever and hatch. To outsiders, it might have seemed like an eccentric display, but for the Riveras, it was part history lesson, part family project, and part reassurance that the family could handle whatever life threw at them. Life on the street had seemed predictable, until tensions began quietly building. A new homeowners association had recently formed, led by an aggressive and controlling president who viewed minor grievances as opportunities to assert authority. Notices appeared overnight, warnings about fences, hedges, and visual clutter of any kind. The Riveras, like many neighbors, brushed off the early notices as overzealous bureaucracy, assuming common sense and neighborly compromise would prevail. Tomas fixed his fence panel one evening, a routine repair to prevent sagging and ensure security, and thought little of it. Yet, the seeds of conflict had already been sown. Whispers spread about the family's yard and the tank. Some neighbors murmured about the tank's intimidating presence, while others openly questioned the family's compliance with the HOA's vague new rules. For the Riveras, life continued much the same, but the calm was deceptive. Behind closed doors, Tomas sensed a subtle shift, a tension that made him glance over his shoulder more often, a sense that the security he had carefully curated around his home might soon be tested. And in the quiet moments before dawn, none of the family could imagine that the coming night would shatter their sense of normalcy entirely. The night air in the cul-de-sac was unusually still, the kind of silence that presses against the eardrums and makes every distant sound feel amplified. Tomas Rivera had gone to bed around 11, exhausted from a long day of work and yard maintenance, while Miguel and Lucia were already dreaming in their shared room, their quiet breathing blending with the hum of the neighborhood. It was the kind of night where even a distant car engine seemed to echo through the street, and yet, nothing could have prepared the Riveras for the chaos that was about to descend. At exactly 3:12 a.m., headlights pierced the darkness. A convoy of vans and trucks rolled into the cul-de-sac with unnerving precision, moving silently as though they had been planning the operation for weeks. Men in dark uniforms emerged, faces obscured, and began positioning a bulldozer right at the edge of the Rivera property. They refused to identify themselves, ignoring Tomas's demands for credentials, and muttered about an official order as if the family were expected to comply without question. The roar of the bulldozer's engine broke the quiet like a thunderclap, startling the children awake and sending the family dog into frantic barking. Splintered wood and the smell of fresh sawdust filled the night as the fence, Tomas's long-standing barrier of privacy and protection, began to crumble under the metal teeth of the machine. Tomas rushed outside, his robe flapping and bare feet hitting the cold pavement. Heart pounding, he demanded that the men stop, but they pushed him aside without hesitation, their hands firm and unyielding. The adrenaline coursing through him made his voice rise to a shout, but in the dark, with heavy machinery moving like predators, his words seemed insignificant. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911, trying to explain the surreal scene, men tearing down his property in the middle of the night, no identification, no legal justification. Dispatchers responded with confusion, questioning whether the incident involved city authorities or a civil matter. By the time local police arrived, the bulldozers had finished their work and the intruders were gone, leaving only splintered wood, bent posts, and a family shaken to its core. By sunrise, the neighborhood had awoken to whispers and questions. Lights flicked on across the street as curious neighbors stepped outside, trying to make sense of the destruction. Some feared reprisal, others speculated wildly about why a family's fence would be destroyed at such an hour. Tomas surveyed the damage in stunned silence, a mixture of fury and disbelief tightening his chest. For Miguel, watching through the cracked bedroom blinds, the violation felt personal, an affront to his family's safety and dignity that could not be ignored. That morning, what had seemed like a quiet suburban street had been irrevocably altered. Miguel Rivera had always been protective of his family, a trait that sometimes made him seem older than his 14 years. He was quiet, observant, and fiercely loyal, spending much of his time helping his father maintain the yard, the house, and, of course, the decommissioned M1 Abrams in the backyard. The tank had been a fascination for him since he could remember, not just a relic of war, but a symbol of discipline, strength, and resilience. That night, as he peered through the blinds at the splintered fence and the chaotic aftermath of the 3 a.m. incident, something inside him snapped. Fear, anger, and a deep sense of injustice collided, forming a resolve he could not ignore. The memory of the faceless men bulldozing his family's property replayed in his mind like a video on loop. The shouting, the destruction, the helplessness of seeing his father shoved aside, it all fueled a determination that felt almost instinctive. Miguel knew the tank could never truly be used against people in a violent sense. It was decommissioned, stripped of weaponry, and essentially immobile for combat purposes. But that was precisely the point. The tank was a symbol, a statement of presence and warning that the Riveras would not allow themselves to be intimidated. With adrenaline coursing through him, Miguel slipped into the backyard, his movements careful but urgent, and began the careful, practiced maneuvering of the M1 Abrams from its shelter to a position at the edge of the property. Every lever, every hatch, every control he had learned from his father over countless weekends of tinkering now mattered. Miguel was meticulous, he understood the consequences of missteps. Neighbors might have seen a hulking metal vehicle moving in the yard, but inside the cab, Miguel's heart pounded with responsibility. He wasn't acting out of childish bravado, he was responding to a violation of trust, a threat to the safety of his family, and a principle that had been instilled in him since birth: you protect the people you love, even when it seems impossible. By the time Tomas came outside, still shaken from the morning chaos, Miguel had positioned the tank in a way that was visually commanding. It was not aggressive in a literal sense, but the symbolism was unmistakable. It was a message: this family could not be bullied, dismissed, or overrun. Tomas looked at his son, initially with disbelief, then with a reluctant mixture of pride and concern. The gesture was impulsive, yes, but it spoke volumes about Miguel's character, his courage, loyalty, and willingness to take action in a situation that had spiraled far beyond normal comprehension. That day, in a quiet suburban backyard, a 14-year-old had transformed fear into a display of resolve, ensuring that the Riveras would not quietly surrender to intimidation. By mid-morning, the quiet of the cul-de-sac had been replaced by the hum of curiosity and tension. Word of the 3 a.m. incident had spread quickly, fueled by neighbors who were both alarmed and intrigued by what had happened. The image of a suburban family's yard, now dominated by a hulking M1 Abrams tank, quickly made its way onto local social media feeds. Photos captured Miguel standing beside the tank, a resolute figure amid splintered wood and disturbed earth. What began as a private act of teenage defiance had become a viral spectacle, drawing attention from reporters, bloggers, and residents from outside the neighborhood. Suddenly, the Riveras found themselves at the center of a storm they had never sought. Law enforcement arrived in full force as questions mounted. Officers were tasked with navigating a complex situation. The fence had been demolished, the identities of the bulldozing men were suspicious at best, and the tank, though decommissioned, posed a unique safety concern. Tomas Rivera cooperated fully, explaining the history of the vehicle and the hours of meticulous work he and his son had invested in it. Yet even his detailed account could not prevent officers from asking difficult questions. How had the tank ended up in a suburban yard? Was it legal to maneuver it in a residential area? Were the children ever at risk? Every answer seemed to provoke more scrutiny, and for the first time, Tomas felt the weight of his family's visibility. Meanwhile, the fake HOA enforcers were exposed as impersonators. Investigations revealed that they had no legal authority, and their orders were fabricated. Civil suits and police reports began to pile up, with neighbors and legal authorities seeking accountability. The HOA itself faced public criticism and internal upheaval. The president's aggressive methods were now under review, and questions about procedural overreach shook the association's credibility. The entire suburban community had to confront the reality that intimidation and power plays could escalate far beyond the polite facades of lawns and mailboxes. For Miguel, the fallout was both exhilarating and sobering. He had acted out of loyalty and instinct, but the visibility of his actions carried unforeseen consequences. Reporters wanted interviews, neighbors whispered judgments, and social media offered both praise and criticism. Tomas tried to guide him through the scrutiny, emphasizing lessons about responsibility, restraint, and public perception. Miguel realized that courage was not simply about bold gestures, it was about understanding context, measuring risk, and preparing for the unintended consequences of dramatic actions. By the end of the day, the Riveras had learned that even symbolic acts could ripple outward, affecting legal standing, public opinion, and family dynamics. Their quiet life had been replaced with a spotlight, forcing them to navigate a maze of legal, social, and emotional challenges. In the weeks that followed, the Rivera family worked tirelessly to restore a sense of normalcy. The chaos of the 3 a.m. bulldozing and the viral spectacle of Miguel standing beside the tank had left the neighborhood buzzing with gossip, legal disputes, and curiosity. Yet amidst the turmoil, the family found opportunities for reflection, growth, and quiet triumph. The HOA, discredited and exposed for its overreach and the actions of the fake enforcers, faced internal upheaval. New leadership emerged, emphasizing transparency, accountability, and genuine community dialogue. For the Riveras, this was a small victory, a validation that standing up for one's rights, even dramatically, could spark meaningful change. Tomas Rivera, ever pragmatic, began the slow process of repairing the fence, reinforcing boundaries, and restoring the yard. He involved Miguel and Lucia at every step, turning what had been a traumatic event into a family project. Each post reset, each panel replaced, became symbolic of resilience and the reclaiming of their space. The tank, once a provocative centerpiece, was repositioned and curated more deliberately. It became less a tool of defiance and more a monument to the lessons they had learned: preparation, responsibility, and the importance of protecting one's family while respecting the broader consequences of one's actions. Miguel, meanwhile, reflected on his own role in the events. His impulsive decision to maneuver the M1 Abrams had been courageous, but he realized that bold actions carried scrutiny, public attention, and potential legal complications. He spoke with his father about accountability, understanding that true courage was not just about confronting injustice, but also about recognizing when to act, how to act safely, and the potential ripple effects of one's decisions. It was a formative moment, one that would shape his understanding of responsibility and personal agency for years to come. The Riveras also worked to mend relationships with their neighbors. Many who had once whispered judgment now approached with cautious curiosity, drawn by the family's integrity, transparency, and willingness to engage openly. Community meetings became forums for dialogue, fostering a sense of accountability on both sides. Slowly, the cul-de-sac returned to a semblance of peace, but the events of that fateful night lingered as a reminder of how fragile civility could be, and how quickly fear and intimidation could escalate. By winter, the Riveras yard was fully restored, their boundaries respected, and their family bond stronger than ever. The M1 Abrams, once a symbol of teenage defiance, stood as a curated monument of lessons learned: resilience, vigilance, and the power of standing up to wrongdoing. The family had survived an absurd, frightening ordeal, and in the process, had discovered the limits of suburban civility, the strength of their unity, and the importance of courage tempered with wisdom.